It's Saturday. It's 6:30. It's Libertarian Moms. Here we are tonight talking about Boys Will Be Boys, the first in a series of Boys Will Be Boys. This time, it's specifically about consent. So don't go anywhere. Pull yourself a cocktail. We're the Libertarian Moms, and here we go. So, Melissa, I was telling Jess I've been live streaming all weekend, and I keep like queuing up these little videos, and people who've never done this before are like, "What's happening right now?" But we're used to it, right? Like that's it's like a classic YouTuber move to like intro and then bam, here's our branding. Maybe someday we'll pay somebody to do some real branding instead of the shitty little stuff I've done for us. Anyhow. We are the Libertarian Moms. This is Parenting Porcupines, and tonight's episode is about consent. And it comes out of Jessica and I brainstorming last summer about this idea of boys will be boys and how many times we allow that boys will be boys phrase to excuse bad behavior, and how many times we kind of sweep under the rug the behaviors of young boys, little kids, and even 9-year-old, 10-year-old, even into adolescence. And it sort of creates this sense of entitlement that behavior is okay. And so we were talking about how do we talk to our kids about what is and is not okay. And right now we're living in an era where consent is a hot word. It's everywhere, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of consent. I only have one child, my daughter Holly, who's just about to be 13, and she was introduced to the concept of consent when she was 9 through Girls Rock Camp, where they talked to her specifically about sexuality. It was about what is and is not okay in terms of how people approach you and your body, and whether or not it's okay to hug people that you don't want to hug, and are you being asked to put up with things that you maybe don't want to put up with, somebody sitting too close to you, somebody squeezing you up against the wall on the bus or something like that, and how you can protect yourself and your domain, your own personal domain, by using appropriate vocabulary. And so I want to kind of jump into that tonight. And you guys both have boys, so I'm really curious about how moms with boys approach this and the kind of behavior you expect to see from your sons and how you sort of edge through this conversation with them. So let's jump in. My first question for you guys, though, is whether or not the word consent is part of the vocabulary in your house. So let's start with Jessica, and then you can toss it to Melissa when you're done.
I don't know that we've ever discussed specifically the word consent, but we are in this weird teenage boy age where Jackson wants to put his hands on people. Like, that's funny. It's funny for him to touch his brother and push him, not in a weird way, but just putting his hands on him. And so we're working through that right now. That's something that we're having to constantly say, don't put your hands on people. You can't put your hands on people. People don't want to be touched. If somebody doesn't want to be touched, you don't touch them. If they tell you to stop, you stop. So I don't think we've necessarily talked about the word consent as much as we've talked about the idea of it and boundaries and respecting boundaries and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the experience most people are having, right? Like we haven't used that word, but it's a concept we're working around. What about you, Melissa? Is that word in your house? You've got 3. Your girls must be like, dude, stop.
Yeah. Yeah, my kids couldn't tell you what the word consent means, but they know no means no. I say no means no 10 times a week.
Right.
Because, I want to wrestle with my sister. I want to sit, my kids want to sit like on top of people. Move over. Stop touching me. But, they get mad. They touch each other. And keep your hands keep your body to yourself. If you want to hug someone, if you want to cuddle with someone, you have to ask first. Mm-hmm. Make sure they want you touching them. You can't just go up and touch people.
Right.
So yes, we work on this a lot because this is the source of a lot of friction in my house because they're little. They want to touch each other.
Yeah.
And everybody.
Well, and a lot of it's about personal space, right? And respecting other people's personal space. And from the time Holly was little, I had this conversation with her. I was kind of when I read this article that's posted in the show notes, if you guys are looking for the show notes, they're out on the blog. It's parentingporcupines.com. And our out in this article, it was talking about how to talk to kids like ages 1 to 5 about this. And I thought, well, none of our kids are that little, so we'll just like jump forward. But I remember when Holly was really little, having this conversation with her and saying to her over and over and over again, your body belongs to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody touches it or sees it without your consent. Right. Even when she's like 2 and she doesn't know what consent means, unless you say it's okay. Right. Like having this over and over and over again, your body belongs to you. And part of that was wanting to protect her from people that are around her when I'm not around her, because she was in daycare and she was, of course, going to elementary school and this kind of thing. But part of it, too, was just sort of a hyper awareness of she's a girl. And I think of her as being vulnerable, and I'm not sure that's okay, right? Like,
well, having boys and girls now, when I was, the summer I was 15, the summer before I turned 16, we went to Florida, my whole family. We went and stayed with family friends. Their son was 4 months older than me. We've been friends our entire life. He's my oldest friend in the world. He didn't have a curfew. And I'm like, well, Dad, look, Josh doesn't have a curfew. And my dad looks me square in the face and says, well, he's a boy. I'm like, what do you mean, well, he's a boy? What does that have to do? Like, but now having girls, I'm like, okay, I see your point, but still. Jeez. I was so mad that day.
Well,
like, what do you mean, but he's a boy?
There are all these stories right now floating around through the campus here in Columbia related to girls being drugged in these bars, them being, waking up in places they've never been before, right? Like there is a vulnerability there. They're being preyed upon, and these are 19 and 20. These are grown women, right? So as we think about this, like as little kids and trying to get them to understand as little kids, you don't tell them that, like, you're going to get roofied when you're in college. Like, this is not the right way to tell your kids about consent. No. But at the same time, like when it was introduced to Holly at Girls Rock Camp, I wasn't mad. I was glad, because they're building a community. All these girls at this camp are having this conversation about what is and is not okay. And so I thought it was really important that we bring it up and we talk a little bit about it from that. So when did it become part of the conversation for us? When Holly, very little. Early on, right? Very little. And there's some tips here on the blog. Like I said, it's parentingporcupines.com. So I thought we'd go through these and just chit chat about a few of them. So the first one was to reinforce to the kids that the way their bodies are changing is great, but it can be confusing. So is this a conversation you're having with your kids as they like edge closer to puberty? Jessica's shaking her head no. And no. Melissa's saying yes.
Trying to think of what conversations we've actually had, because Jackson's had sex ed at school and they covered all the basic stuff, because I looked over it. I went to the school and reviewed all the materials because I wanted to know what they were going to be discussing, and he knew that I had done that. And after the course was over, I did a check-in with him, and I just asked him, based on what you've learned this week, is there anything that you want to talk about? Are there any questions that you have? And he said no. And so I kind of respected that, because I knew that if he wanted to talk about it, he would talk about it. And I left it at that. But as the mom of a boy, I mean, obviously it's important to me to teach him consent and not to put his hands on people and not to do bad things, because I don't want to raise a Brock Turner, right? Like, that's not what I want. But I also want to make sure that he knows how to prevent putting himself in a situation where he might be falsely accused, because as the mom of a boy, that is a fear. That is a fear for me, because we've seen that happen. We've seen that ruin boys' lives, being falsely accused. So, I think it has to be looked at from both of those perspectives.
That's a good point. We were having that conversation. We were walking Holly through the Deshaun Watson scenario today, and what we know, what we're thinking, sort of as far as our opinions on that are concerned. And I'm not going to, broadcast that necessarily, but that's a good point to be having a conversation around which side is the side, right? You can protect yourself, but remember that I don't want to raise the girl that is the false accuser either, right? So, Melissa, you were nodding, though. You were saying you are having that conversation about your bodies are changing in strange and unusual and frightening ways.
Well, with my 8-year-old, she's a very, I don't want to say a very large 8-year-old, because she is in the top like 90th for height. She's a very physically advanced 8-year-old. And she's in 2nd grade, and they don't talk about, there's no sex ed in 2nd grade. There's nothing. Right. So we've started talking about, we haven't gotten to the sex part of it, but your skin's going to get oily. Your hair is going to be weird. You have to start using like deodorant and girl products. So we've started having that. There's a book. We read a book and we read it together out loud. And, make sure she doesn't have any questions. And we haven't gotten to the heavy duty stuff yet. But
well, so you make a good point, though, because even when they're that young, we're using this boys will be boys to excuse some of this aggressive behavior, right? So boys chasing girls around on the playground, boys hitting girls, boys trying to kiss girls, right? And it's, oh, he likes you, or, oh, that's just him showing you he wants to be your friend, and this and that. What do you think, Jessica, in terms of allowing that kind of aggressive behavior, even that young?
I don't think it should be tolerated. Because I think it starts young. I think that boys learn that behavior very young. And if it's
you're telling girls if they hit you, they like you. That's such the wrong message. Yeah. Oh my God.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But, I do think to some extent kids will be kids, right? Like kids are going to chase each other and things like that.
They're energetic. Yes.
I think that there is an obvious boundary where a boy is no longer being a boy is being a bully, or a boy is being an asshole. And that's not limited to boys. That happens with girls too. But for the sake of this conversation and the direction that we're going with it, boys will be boys, but that's not an excuse to be an asshole or a rapist, right?
Yeah.
So, and I do think that starts very early, nipping that in the bud.
When I was in high school, I was being, I guess, what's the background here? I don't want to give too much of it. I'll just go with, at one point we got up on a Sunday morning and somebody had emptied a garbage bag across our front yard. And it was these boys, a specific boy, I knew who it was, who had just been torturing me. He had just been mean as hell to me. Anyway. And when my dad called his dad to say to him, like, your son has done this. He has vandalized our property. Number one, his dad didn't get on the phone. His mom took the call. And number two, his mom said, well, boys will be boys. They were in high school. Like, this is unacceptable. They have vandalized somebody else's property to harass a girl. Like, that's unacceptable behavior, and it never should have flown. And instead, not only did it fly, but I eventually reconciled with that guy, and I'm like still friends with him to this day. What the fuck is wrong with me? Like clearly that guy was a total dick. You know what I mean? So at some point you got to be like, sometimes we just forgive this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. Like I just realized as I was saying that out loud, I was like, I actually still know that guy and see him. All right. So it's just dumb. So let's go through a few more on the list real quick. So the second one is to encourage kids to talk about what does feel good and what doesn't feel good. And so, and the other is like to teach your kids to use safe words while they're playing and indicate that they need help when they need to get out of a tough situation. And so I want to talk about that in a broader context in terms of communication. Sometimes as parents, like we sort of take it for granted that our kids are with other kids and everything's all good. And we just sort of like, yay, now I'm sort of off the hook. But how much monitoring do you do of some of those kid on kid relationships? And are you sort of keeping track of, do people feel comfortable with what's happening here? Is there a vocabulary? We definitely have safe words in our house because Holly's very much an introvert and she'll get worn out pretty quickly and other people don't pick up on it. And so I'll be like, hey, do you want to have some popcorn? And she's like, yes. And that's the clue for like her to come downstairs and them to stay upstairs and her to get a couple minutes just to sort of refresh. Right. So like, do you guys have that? Do you have that kind of hyper communication with your kids, or like what's the monitoring situation? What do you think, Jess?
Well, yeah, I do, because we've talked about, touch, like if somebody touches you, if somebody's touching you and you're not comfortable with it, except I didn't really go the route of a safe word. My kids know that it's okay to be direct. They know that they can say, no, I don't want you to do that. Stop touching me. And if the person who's touching them or whatever the situation is does not stop when they ask them to, they remove themselves from that situation and they tell an adult or, someone who can help them if they need help. But, I think safe words are great, but my kids are not necessarily introverts. And so, and I think that might too come with the boy and the girl thing. But yeah, we definitely talked about it. And that it's okay. It's okay to feel uncomfortable and it's okay to remove yourself from a situation if you feel like it's going in a direction that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Yeah. My kids used to think they had to play with anybody that came to the door. Yeah. Like the kids from around the neighborhood. Hey, can Will play? Can Adeline play? And my kids would be like, oh, I guess I got to go. No, you don't. At any time, if you don't want to play anymore, just come home. Just tell them, nope, I got to go. Bye. Just leave. It's
but
fine.
we did have a conversation though about her having to do that herself, right? Yeah. She has to say it herself. If the person comes to the door and she goes, tell them I'm not here, that's not happening. Yeah, like you need to address the fact that you don't want to go out and play. Yeah. And it's perfectly fine to not want to play, but you need to be the one that addresses that. You don't need to hide behind me and get that confidence to be able to say no, or to be able to say, this is not what I'm looking for. Right.
Yeah. Cause you don't have to feel bad for not wanting to play. They don't own your time. It's fine.
Yeah. What about teasing the kids for boy-girl relationships? Like, this drives me crazy when I talk to moms whose young son, right? That's his girlfriend. He just loves her. He adores her, this and that. We had one kid that used to hang out with us a good bit, and Holly and him were just buds, man. Like they just understood each other, right? Like they knew what they wanted to do together. They knew how, what to talk about. Like they just were buds. And as soon as the teasing started about the two of them being more than just buds, like they stopped being friends. And it just breaks my heart that they're not even hanging out anymore, because they used to just get along so well. It was so easy. That friendship was so easy for both of them. And
why
as soon as the teasing started,
sexualize second graders' relationships?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it frustrates me. I really get frustrated by that. Do your kids, are there girls that are that your boys hang out with, Jess, that are being teased about hanging out with the boys?
Not Caldwell, because he's so young. Jackson had a friend the beginning of the school year. Well, all last summer and then the beginning of the school year. A girl from his class, and they were really tight and they talked every day and they FaceTimed. We used to give him some ribbing about, oh, that's your girlfriend, like just being funny, but it wasn't like, oh, Jackson's got a girlfriend. But they kind of went their separate ways, I think, just because
life,
that age. Yeah. but yeah, I do think it's kind of weird when people like kids in second grade, when people are like, I mean, Caldwell has had sweethearts. Like he had a friend, she lives down the street, and he was really sweet on her in kindergarten, and he wanted to get her a gift for Christmas. And so he wanted to get her something nice. He did not want to get her like a stuffed animal. He wanted to get her something nice. And so I took him to this little boutique, and he picked out this cute little necklace for her, and it was adorable, right? And he was so happy to give it to her. And they're still really good friends. Like they're really, really good friends. And it was adorable. It really was. But, it was innocent. And I think that there's a difference between allowing children to have those innocent, like little relationships, those innocent friendships, and then pushing the
And
envelope.
if he's saying it, it's different than everybody else is going, oh, look at them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a bud when I was in kindergarten who named his guinea pig Casey, and I didn't think anything of it. I was actually kind of flattered by it because I absolutely love my name. But then it became a joke in my family that he was my boyfriend, and I didn't think of him that way. And I remember at this point, at 44 years old, I remember being kind of angry that people mistook our relationship for something that it really wasn't. When I'm, 5 and 6 years old, like I remember being pissed about it. And so I've never done that with Holly. Like it's always been they're all pals. They're all pals. The girls are pals. The boys are pals. Anybody you're hanging out with, they're your pals. And until you tell me otherwise, there's nothing there. Like it's just friendship and mutual respect, and that you enjoy each other's company. I've never pushed that one way or the other. And when I have heard it from others, like boy moms whose boys want to hang around with Holly, like one kid invited Holly to his birthday party, and she was the only girl there. And his mom was just like, oh, he just loves him some Holly. Like it's all boys except Holly because he just has the biggest crush on Holly. I was like, don't say that. It's not about that. They're pals, right? Like, and she gets along with all of them. She played soccer with them. She played video games with them. Like she was having a good time with them. There's not any reason to sexualize that. They're like 7. You know what I mean? Like there just isn't reason.
Teach your children to be friends with the opposite sex.
It will benefit them. Yes,
Yeah.
it will benefit them in the long run to think of relationships as not being sexual first, but being based on mutual respect first, right? All right. So then the second half of this article is talking about the teens, and it says to bring back up this good touch, bad touch conversation once your kids become teens, but really to focus on building their self-esteem and reminding them of their value. And I thought this part was interesting. I mentioned it to Holly at lunch today to talk about how do you know when the person you're with is ready to kiss? How do you know that the person that you're with is ready to hold hands or to sit close? What are the indicators that you're being given that this behavior is okay? And I thought that was really interesting because, of course, I asked her and she's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm like, all right, well, let's think about that.
I'm like, I don't know.
Like, let's, because, well, I've been married 20 years.
I've been married for, ever.
Yeah. I mean, I just take it for granted that I can just touch him anytime I want to, right? Like, that's probably not true, but I think it is. I think it's true. It may not be.
But
I don't know.
tell me if I can't. So
when we get them on episode 15, when we get the guys on here, we can ask them about consent and see what they think. But I definitely think like once we got married, it was like, we're good now. Like I can just, whenever I want to, I can touch you, which is the worst possible way to consider those relationships. That consent thing goes forever, right? It's always about being able to be honest with your partner and recognizing those signals. And it's just hard to teach kids how to do that. They're so young.
Well, and everybody's different. Like my okay signal is different than your let's go signal. And it's just, it's an intimacy thing. You just have to know the other person, which is really hard. Yeah.
And that actually is probably one of my biggest concerns as Jackson enters the teenage years, and he's going to, at some point in the next few years, start dating probably. Right. And so, at some point I'm going to have that conversation in greater depth, and figure out like, this is how you need to handle it. And I don't know what the answer is, because do you ask a girl if you can kiss her, or do you just know she wants you to kiss her? And if you think she wants you to kiss her and you kiss her and then you've sexually assaulted her, like, like it can go very awry very quickly. And so it stresses me out, in case you can't tell.
And so let's talk about that though, because here's the thing is that some of these, the accusers, right? Some of this lies on the girl it lies on both parties, right? Some of it lies on the person to make it very clear, this is not what I want. And even if that boundary gets crossed, to say, this is not what I want. And so I want to raise Holly confident enough to be able to say, this is not what I want. It's very different if she says that. She makes it very clear, and this person continues, right, to be aggressive with her. But if she makes it very clear and stands up for herself, in my experience anyway, when I was younger, that there was not a single time that I made it very clear this is not what I want, that the person I was with continued to pursue it. It always was like, oh, okay, I just misunderstood.
Yep.
And so if you can use your words in that way, right? And so sometimes I wonder if some of these accusers that we're hearing from after the fact, it's like they felt maybe they were shamed or they felt bad about it or for whatever reason. And it becomes that assault accusation where it's like, now, wait a second, there were two people in that room and you had a responsibility to stand up for yourself at the time. And for whatever reason, you didn't. And so I'm a little, maybe a little, yeah, because I think people need to be taught, all people, girls and boys, need to be taught to advocate for themselves, as opposed to waiting until after the fact and categorizing something as something that maybe it wasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or making themselves the victim in a situation where maybe they really weren't a victim. It was just a miscommunication. So let's learn to recognize that too. Holly calls them red flags. She goes, I think I can find the red flags. I'm like, really? Let's watch a couple of movies and you tell me what the red flags are.
Yeah.
I'm like, what just happened there? You know what I mean? She's like, yeah, he shouldn't have said that. I'm like, okay. Now we're starting to sort of see some of these. And those 80s movies are perfect for that, right? Because there's a ton of passive aggressive sexual behavior in 80s movies that you're like, wow, how did they get away with that? I mean, seriously, even Breakfast Club, like we haven't even shown it to her yet. Cause I'm like, I can't have that conversation with you yet. But anyway, all that to say, the conversation about consent, probably a vocabulary conversation more than anything, and giving them the right tools to be able to communicate what they're feeling and what they're worried about. And I don't think you're wrong, Jessica, to be worried that these accusations come after the fact. And there's a lot of shame that happens to girls as they experience things that maybe at the time they were happy to experience, but as soon as they shared it with somebody else, they felt ashamed of themselves for having experienced it. And that's a whole other, other thing. Yeah. Girls don't get congratulated for losing their virginity, right? Like they don't get congratulated for some of these sexual conquests. They get shamed for them. So maybe that's something we can continue to work on as a culture. Libertarian culture is consent culture. Want to throw that in there since we are the libertarian moms. I thought this was really interesting because our friend Casey Crow, who was on the show with us a couple of weeks ago, was talking about this. And he said it hadn't hit him necessarily, but when he made the connection, he realized like all of libertarianism is about consent. It's about other people giving permission for things to happen. So Melissa, in terms of libertarianism, do you guys talk about consent in terms of like the government and things like that?
Yes. My son will go off about taxes and wars and things the government does that's for our best interest. And so he doesn't understand the word consent like in a personal relationship, but he understands it with the government. So I'm raising a little anarchist, and he's
That's awesome.
Well, Jessica, I know you're vocal about this with your with the libertarian stuff, at least with your kids. So talk about that. Yeah. Has that come up with them?
Yeah. I mean, especially in the taxation conversation, I think, because, we are taxed and we didn't consent to that. We have no choice. There's no opt-out box you can check when you file your taxes every year. Unless you just don't file them, which I don't recommend because, you can get in big trouble. But and
you don't get in big trouble for a while. You can live a few years before they find you.
If anybody from the IRS is watching, we do file our taxes. But
live on a boat like McAfee.
Right.
I think that a connection that it's important to make is when we talk about these types of things, when we talk about consent, because it is a consent culture, it all comes back to the non-aggression principle, which we've talked about in an episode before. And the basic kind of outline of that principle that is the cornerstone of libertarianism is You don't hurt people and you don't take their stuff. And so if you apply that to consent, whether it's in government versus citizens, or, you know, boy and girl relationships, or boy and boy relationships, or girl and girl, whatever relationship that looks like, it's, are you doing something to this person that is going to hurt them in some way, right? Because that is aggression. So I think that for people who are watching who don't fully understand libertarianism, that's kind of the whole foundation of what we believe politically. So sorry, that was kind of a
let people live their lives. If they're not hurting anyone.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted. That's the reason I put it out there, in terms of like this concept of libertarianism being a consent culture thing, to me is such a great way to bridge the gap between people who are fierce advocates for consent culture, right? They might be fierce for whatever reason. Maybe they have experienced a trauma of some kind. Maybe they've been a victim of some kind. Like, for whatever reason, people are out there with, you know, feeling like consent is the thing. And it's important to say to them, yeah, there's so many parts of your life where you're doing things that you did not consent to do. Taxation is just one of them, right? Yeah. Property seizure is another one of them. You know, when police officers pull you over and want to search your car, and like these kinds of things, like there's a lot of things that happen to us in our day-to-day life that we did not consent to. And so sexuality is just one piece of it. But on the side of this, you know, to kind of go back to our little theme of the boys will be boys, aggression is not always coming from a masculine person. It's not always coming from a man, but it is usually coming from a person who perceives that they have authority. Yeah. That they have the right to do this, and that other people do not have the right to resist, and or that they won't resist. They believe that they won't resist. And so I think even just that small sign of resistance, like you said, Melissa, no means no, right? That small sign of resistance can be enough to protect you from some of these aggression things that happen.
Yes. My kids came home. My 6-year-old sings a song, and it's adorable, and I'm trying to remember the exact words. But she came home one day going, "Stop, don't touch me there. That is my private square." So they talk about it in school.
That's
like
anywhere
your bathing suit is.
Yeah.
No one, that's your area, wherever your bathing suit covers. And there's a song, and it's adorable.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting that our schools are entrusted with that education? And it kind of makes me wonder, like, how many families aren't having conversations outside of school, that they are simply trusting the schools to be having those conversations with their kids.
I don't trust the schools for anything, but yeah.
Me neither.
Well, I reviewed.
They taught her a song.
Yeah, I mean, I made an appointment to go and review the curriculum before I agreed to let him do it, because I wanted to make sure that I knew what they were going to be teaching him. And obviously I felt like what they taught was sufficient for his age. Otherwise we would have been having some additional conversations, or I might have opted him out entirely. Right. Yep. But what they taught, I was very fortunate that it was acceptable based on my standards. I was comfortable with it, and right. I feel like he understood it, and at his age, it was good for him. And
age appropriate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I definitely looked at it before to make sure.
So we started having these conversations around puberty like a long time ago, right? Just sort of leading up to it, getting ready for it. That had nothing to do with sexuality. It was all about biology, all about your physical body and how your body's going to change, right? And so Holly comes back
where we are. Yep.
From that first exposure to this through the schools, right? And she's just horrified, like just absolutely horrified by what she's learned. And she's like, can we just stop now? Like, can we just put the brakes on? Can I just stay this way for the rest of my life? And I'm like, you're not going to want that. I assure you. There's a movie about a girl that got turned into a vampire at your exact age, and she never grew up. And she's very sad by it. Her name is Kirsten Dunst. We'll watch it together. You'll understand. You'll get it why being a little girl for the rest of your life is not good. You're not going to want that.
All right. I just want to say, I want to make sure I say one thing because our kids are all older, but please, people with smaller children, teach them the right names for things.
Mhm.
Don't call it your cookie or your yum yum or whatever. Call it a vagina. Please, I beg of you, so that if God forbid something happens. There was a story, I don't know if it's like one of those, oh, we tell this story to scare people. But, the little girl's like, oh, my uncle eats my cookie every night. And the teacher's like, oh, well, just tell, whatever, because she wasn't using the right word.
I feel like that's an
Teach
urban
them the right.
myth.
I know.
I feel like there's no
it
way.
feels like that, but
No,
please,
it does happen. It does happen.
please teach your children to use the words and not be afraid of, it's my vagina. Got it.
Right.
Good.
My
Penis,
husband's
vagina. I've got
my
it flagged by the FCC.
my husband's cousin
And
is
now
a child
YouTube won't let
advocate.
us be on their channel anymore. Yeah. It's nice.
My husband's cousin is a child advocate, and she works with kids who have been
Yes.
abused.
Teach them
And it
what
does.
the names are. Yes.
It does happen.
I know our kids are older, but I wanted to make that public service announcement.
But again, so we go back to this idea of like from the time Holly was 2 years old, and even in that article that's linked in our show notes, if you go out to parentingporcupines.com, you'll find it. It talks about those little kids, talking to them about your body belongs to you, right?
Yeah.
Not to anybody else. And I would say to Holly, say it back to me. Who does your body belong to? And she would go, me. Right? Like nobody else. And it's so critical from such a little age to be able to understand that they have that kind of autonomy. You are in possession of your own self. And I think that for at least us, that was the vocabulary that we've always used to help give her a sense of self and an individuality. And you're not something to be used by other people. You're not something to be played with or touched if you don't want that. Like you have your own autonomy. And that was probably the biggest piece for me very early on, to make sure she's instilled with that sense of, you don't have to put up with this. You don't have to allow people to treat you badly simply because that's what they want, right? You have the ability to stand up for yourself against those kinds of behaviors.
You don't have to hug anybody if you don't want to. You don't have to kiss anybody if you don't want to.
I never once was like, give your granddaddy a hug. Make sure you hug this person. No, not ever. And I've actually said to other adults, like, Holly doesn't have to hug anybody she doesn't want to. Yeah. And she will volunteer them. She will give hugs to people that she loves. And if she doesn't hug you, that's just your bad luck.
Not feeling it that day. Yep.
Yeah, she's just not feeling it. So I didn't want her to grow up not wanting to be touched. But, now she's 13 and she does not want to be touched by anybody. And every night I'm like, can I have a hug? Will you hug me? Okay. Even as her mom, I'm asking for consent. All right. Well, thanks, ladies, so much for being here tonight. Thanks for being part of the conversation. This was the first episode of our Boys Will Be Boys series. We're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between raising girls and raising boys in season 3, but not next week, because next week we got a totally different topic. We're actually going to take on grief again next week. And we're going to talk about sadness and helping our kids through loss and through grief. So that's been Parenting Porcupines for this week. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Melissa. I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.